9. HMS Stubborn. The HMS Stubborn was a British Royal Navy submarine built in 1942. It spent World War II patrolling for enemy ships in home waters, off the Scandinavian coast, and in the Pacific Far East. The vessel truly lived up to its name, successfully completing 10 war patrols and sinking numerous vessels despite repeatedly sustaining damage along the way. The submarine survived the war, but it came out of the conflict in pretty rough shape. It was deliberately scuttled off the northern Maltese coast in 1946 as a sonar training target. The wreck sits mostly upright on the sandy sea bottom, 164 feet, 50 meters beneath the waves. It's one of the few remaining examples of the 67 S-class submarines that were built. Most were sold for scrap or lost in the war. Divers rediscovered the vessel in 1994 after it sat forgotten for decades. In fact, locals were reportedly unaware that such a fascinating wreck even existed, and so close to them. Its 3 hatches are open, but it's unsafe to try entering the vehicle, and its torpedo tubes and propellers are still visible. 8. Hitler's failed stadium. Before World War II broke out, Adolf Hitler acted on his grand vision of building one of the world's largest sports stadiums in the city of Nuremberg. Known as the Deutschstadion, or the German Stadium, it would be over 2,600 feet, 793 meters long, and 1,476, 450 meters wide. Its 300-foot-high, 91-meter grandstands would have enough room for 400,000 spectators. Hitler and his chief architect Albert Speer ordered the construction of a test model of a section of the U-shaped stadium before the real deal could be built. A 400-member workforce spent the next year and a half creating a true-to-scale section of seating in a forested area about an hour outside of Nuremberg. It was big enough to hold 40,000 people. The stadium's designers were pretty pleased with the test model, and construction was ordered to begin in 1938. But his priorities shifted when the war broke out, and the project was abandoned the following year. Locals dismantled most of the test model and used the wood to build new homes after theirs were destroyed in the war. There are still some visible remnants of the structure, including walls and concrete pillars. The site has been reclaimed by nature and is once again filled with plants and trees. 7. Toxic pollution. Less than a mile off the Scottish coast, there's a small uninhabited landmass called Greenard Island. In 1942, it became home to a top-secret biological weapons testing facility. The UK government experimented with a deadly anthrax strain called Volum 14578 by packing it into bombs and deploying the weapons on innocent flocks of sheep. The results were nothing short of deadly and proved that Volum 14578 had the capacity to contaminate entire German cities for decades. Consequently, the tests left Greenard Island heavily polluted. During the 1980s, a clandestine organization of environmental activists calling themselves Operation Dark Harvest began writing to newspapers about the toxic conditions. They claimed that a pair of scientists had visited the site firsthand and collected soil samples, which the group threatened to leave in places that would make the problem impossible for the British government to ignore. The activists eventually made good on their promises by leaving a soil sample outside the Porton Down military research facility. It tested positive for anthrax. Decontamination efforts finally began in 1986. The most heavily contaminated soil was removed from Greenard, and the entire island was sprayed with a mixture of formaldehyde and seawater. They left behind a flock of sheep, which remained mostly healthy. Greenard Island was officially declared anthrax-free in 1990, and none of the sheep have tested positive for the poison since 2007. The details of what went on at Greenard became publicly available in 1997, when documents about the biological warfare project were declassified. Some people believe that the site could still be toxic, but the good news is that it's unlikely anyone will go there anytime soon, because the property is privately owned. 6. Oradour-sur-Glane. On June 10, 1944, Nazis entered the French village of Oradour-sur-Glane and demanded to see residents' identity papers. They locked women and children in a church and forced the men into another building. Then they embarked on a campaign of terror, looting the village and massacring 643 people in just a few hours' time. There were only 6 survivors, in addition to 20 people who'd fled immediately upon the Nazis' arrival. One eyewitness said that the Germans shot the villagers' men in the legs so they couldn't run, then set the building they were in on fire, leaving them to slowly suffer to death. After that, the Nazis blew up the church holding the women and children. Those who tried to escape through the building's windows were shot to death. SS Commander Adolf Diekmann claimed that the massacre was in retaliation for the kidnapping and murder of a fellow officer. The survivors were allowed to return to Oradour-sur-Glane a week later to bury their dead. They built a new village nearby. After the war, French General Charles de Gaulle ordered for the destroyed village to be preserved as a memorial to the lives lost and as a reminder of the Nazis' cruelty. Today, it's a ghost town that sits in ruins. There's a museum at the village's entrance, along with a memorial bearing all the victims' names. To some, it may seem morbid to preserve the remnants of such a tragic and traumatic event. But by inviting visitors to reflect on what happened at Oradour-sur-Glane, the site keeps the senseless atrocities of hatred and war at the forefront of people's minds, which is important to prevent history from repeating itself. 5. USS Bear. The USS Bear was a US Coast Guard cutter and a forerunner to modern icebreakers that enjoyed a long career in the frigid Arctic, Antarctic, and North Atlantic regions. Built in 1874 as a sealing vessel, the ship entered military service a decade later when the US Navy bought it and used it for an Arctic rescue mission. After that, the Bear served under the Coast Guard for 40 years, patrolling Alaska's 20,000-mile, 32,187-kilometer coastline for seal poachers, illicit traders, and people in need of help. It also functioned as a floating courthouse, delivered food to civilians in need, and ferried reindeer between Siberia and Alaska. From 1939 to 1941, the Bear served in the US Antarctic Service Expedition. During World War II, it patrolled the waters off Greenland, making it the oldest Navy ship to be deployed outside the continental US, and one of the last ships with sails to be used in war. The Bear was finally retired from military service in 1948. In 1963, it was sold to a Philadelphia businessman named Alfred Johnston, who planned to convert it into a floating restaurant. But the vessel foundered and sank 260 miles, 418 kilometers east of Boston, while en route from California to its new home. The Coast Guard rediscovered the wreck in 2019, but only recently confirmed its identity as the USS Bear. It's unclear whether there are plans to further explore it. What do you think should happen to the USS Bear? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. 4. Valley of Death Massacre. By early 1945, the Nazis realized that they were probably going to lose the war against the Allies, and they scrambled to hide evidence of their war crimes. In January of that year, they marched 50 prisoners into the forest in northern Poland and shot them to death one by one at close range. Then they burned the bodies and buried them in a mass grave. It happened near the site of another massacre that had been carried out in 1939. But until recently, both events were only known based on eyewitness accounts. Archaeologists finally uncovered physical evidence of the gruesome killings last year while excavating in the area. In addition to human remains, the team dug up an array of artifacts, including jewelry, cigarette lighters, bullet casings, and more. Many massacres like this happened outside concentration camps during the war. But these sites are rarely studied, out of respect for Jewish burial customs and beliefs, which prohibit the disturbance of human remains. The recently discovered evidence is in a region known as the Valley of Death, where the Nazis murdered hundreds of priests, intellectuals, disabled individuals, and members of the Jewish faith. Some of the victims' remains have been identified through personal belongings that were found at the site. Experts are performing DNA tests in hopes of naming more victims and finding any surviving family members. But it's unlikely that they'll identify every individual due to the sheer number of killings that happened there. Once the testing's complete, the remains will be respectfully reburied. 3. Love letters. While renovating the Esplanade Hotel in Scarborough, England last year, workers found a trove of World War II-era artifacts hidden beneath the floorboards of a utility room. The collection includes an old Vaseline tin, cigarette packs, toothpaste tubes, candy wrappers, and a handful of letters exchanged between a man and a woman who were deeply in love but separated by distance. The pair wrote about the trivial details of their daily lives, like the weather, going on outings with their friends, and having sore gums from an abscessed tooth. They also expressed deeper sentiments, like feeling lonely and depressed, and missing each other as the days apart dragged by slowly and painfully. In one letter, the woman wrote, "Wherever you go, my darling, don't ever forget that I love you more than anything else on earth." The letters aren't signed, but the Scarborough Historical and Archaeological Society, SHAC, hopes to identify the writers. They've dated the correspondence to sometime between 1941 and 1944, and believe that one of the parties was a British military soldier who was stationed at the hotel during the war. One of the letters contains a return address that was traced to a couple named Jesse and James McConnell. Their son, John, served in the Royal Air Force before tragically dying in a plane crash in 1943. He was just 19 years old. The letters may have been exchanged between John and his girlfriend. It seems like a strong lead, but the SHAC has yet to update the public on whether it panned out. At last update, the organization said that it hopes to find more World War II relics inside the hotel, but that the on and off nature of the country's COVID-19 restrictions had slowed down their search. Some discoveries, like these letters, may not be worth a lot of money, but they're treasures in their own right for their historic value, offering a rare glimpse into the traumas of war and the emotional struggles that came along with being separated from loved ones. 2. Possible stolen treasure in Poland. There are countless stories about treasure hoards of immeasurable worth being stashed in places around the world at various points throughout history. Many of these rumors are thought to be purely mythical, but sometimes even the experts lend credibility to legends about hidden troves. More than 75 years ago, an SS officer going by the alias Michaelis wrote about Commander Heimlich Himmler's orders to hide loads of stolen European treasures, including gold, jewels, priceless artwork, and more. He listed 11 sites where the items were allegedly concealed, including an abandoned 200-foot deep, 60 meters well behind the 16th century Hochberg Palace in Poland. The well reportedly contains billions of dollars worth of gold from the former German central bank. The writings also claim that the Nazis murdered any witness to the process of hiding the goods and dumped their bodies in the well along with the treasure. Then they sealed the well's entrance by detonating explosives. After the war ended, the journal was secretly kept at a Masonic lodge in Quedlinburg, Germany, which counted former high-ranking Nazi officers among its top members. Michaelis, who controlled the Nazi transport throughout southern Poland, was one of them. In 2019, the organization handed the diary over to an organization called the Silesian Bridge as an apology for World War II. At last update, the Polish Ministry of Culture and National Heritage had yet to confirm the journal's authenticity, but it hasn't been dismissed as a fake. The palace that the treasure is allegedly hidden behind still stands, serving as a good sign that the hoard might still be there if the claims are true. 1. Harrio Wireless Telegraph Station. In the years immediately following World War I, the Imperial Japanese Navy built a powerful radio transmitter facility in the city of Sasebo. Known as the Harrio Wireless Telegraph Station, it consists of several 446-foot tall, 136 meters reinforced concrete towers that resemble smokestacks. There are also several smaller buildings at the site, including a transmission room which sits in the center of the towers. Legend has it that the official order to attack Pearl Harbor came through Harrio. The order originated on the battleship Nagato, then made its way through Tokyo, and then allegedly reached the wireless station. Nobody knows if this is true because Japanese records were burned at the end of the war. But all the signs point toward it being the case, since Harrio was built to transmit long-distance messages, and its towers were directly connected to the nearby Sasebo Air Defense Command Center. The site operated until 1997 before it was abandoned. The towers were gutted of their equipment, and the facility was condemned and has since become overgrown, although there is an on-site staff that watches over and maintains it. Although the telegraph station isn't open to the public, the former Sasebo Regional Repatriation Center is just a few miles away, and has been turned into a museum dedicated to lesser-known aspects of life after World War II. Here, visitors can learn what it was like for Japanese military members and members of the country's former colonies who returned when the conflict ended. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Bye for now.